All right, today we're going to talk about identity in Bitcoin and how I know that Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto. So first, if we want to talk about identity in Bitcoin, we have to look at the white paper. So the white paper actually talks about how identity is linked in Bitcoin under the section privacy. And in fact, the white paper says specifically that identity is firewalled from transactions. So we can see that contrary to the existing electronic banking systems that Satoshi referenced in the white paper, identity is firewalled from transactions. So what that means is that we actually cannot link identity to a transaction with no other information. So we have to then ask ourselves, well, if identity is firewalled from transactions in Bitcoin, what exactly is identity? So something that has always stuck with me, Craig Wright told me this a while back about identity. He said, identity is something that is earned over time. So it's not something that's granted to you by government or by any possession of something. It's actually gained over time. And so I've really had to think about what that means for a number of reasons. But the first of which means that, for example, if I have an identification card, that doesn't actually mean that that is me or that is mine. So I could have a fake identification card. There's a whole host of issues with just proving identity with an identification card, for example. The fake ID business in the United States is a good example of that. So if identity is earned over time, we're now going to talk about what that means and how I can use that information to know that Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto. So I'm going to start with first a brief story. So this is an unrelated story. So there's a show that started here in the United States called South Park. It's been running. It's one of the longest running animated shows of all time. And when the two people that created the show were trying to pitch this to networks, they had built, they were commissioned to build a Christmas card short for a TV executive. So they made this like 5-minute thing called The Spirit of Christmas. And when they turned that in, they gave it over to the executive who wanted to send it out as a Christmas card to the people around him. They didn't put their name on it. So they didn't put their name on this short called The Spirit of Christmas. It was sent out to people like George Clooney and things like that. So like George Clooney started recording it on VHS and sending it out to his friends. And it kind of was the first viral short. This was like right before the internet and when people were still copying VHS tapes. So when the two creators were still trying to pitch things in LA and trying to make it in the business, they found out that other people were claiming that they had made The Spirit of Christmas because they didn't put their name on it. So how did they prove that, well, no, we're actually the ones that created that thing? Well, they had the construction cutouts of the paper they made to build the shots. They had evidence of they had the machines that could produce those shots and all that kind of stuff. They had more information about the creation of this thing than anyone else did. And then ultimately they got the show South Park. It was ordered for a pilot. And now, like I said, it's the longest running animated show in television's history. So I'm telling that story for a very specific reason, because it's not just the claim of I am this that's granted identity. Identity is earned over time. So, for example, so now let's take it back to like you're in high school and you have a calculus teacher, right? So someone is a calculus teacher, but you enter their classroom having no idea who this person is. How do you know that they are a calculus teacher? They can say, I am a calculus teacher, but in order to find out that they are a calculus teacher, you want to determine that they have information about calculus that they can teach to you. Otherwise, you could then pretty quickly determine they are not a calculus teacher, right? So this goes for any subject matter expert. In order to be granted the identity of a subject matter expert, you have to earn that by convincing others that you are a subject matter expert in that field. So that means that you need to explain your work. Let's say theoretically, you're a professor, you're a researcher in academia, and you come out with some kind of new theory or some new information, right? If you were the only person that had that theory, that made that discovery, then the only person that could identify as the discoverer would be one that could explain their work. Does that make sense? So in order to identify as the discoverer, you would be the only one qualified in the world to explain your work. So now let's take Bitcoin. I'm going to list out, I have some notes, that's why I'm looking to my left here. I'm going to list out a number of things that were mysteries in Bitcoin's history. So the first is going to be probably the biggest one, which is Bitcoin script. So why was when Bitcoin script was released, it had a lot of other things going on in it than just the ability to send coins by sending coins to a public key. So there was really never a complete explanation for Bitcoin script. In fact, when people like Gavin and other Bitcoin core developers saw what was in script, they just saw them as liabilities, and they started stripping the functionality away. So we have a mystery of Bitcoin script, right? We then have a mystery of why was there a poker game in the first implementation of the code. In fact, who's the people that did you know that there was a poker game in the first version of the software? Did you know that there was a marketplace in the first version of the software? Why was there a marketplace in the first version of the software? Someone who created this would be the one to have an answer for that, a logical answer for that, right? We have the mystery of the double hash. Why is a double hash used in Bitcoin? Someone that created this would probably have an explanation for that. And then lastly, because Satoshi Nakamoto was very clear that Bitcoin could scale past Visa, whoever created it would have to have an explanation as to why they believed it could scale, and have a plan to scale it, right? So those are probably the biggest mysteries around the creator of Bitcoin, and the person that we would identify as the creator would have that information, right? So now let's step through those one by one. So the first is Bitcoin script. So Craig Wright was the first person in the world to claim that Bitcoin script is Turing complete. The only person in the world. This was in 2015. He said it publicly. I'm sure he knew it sooner because, as evidenced when Satoshi Nakamoto was emailing with Mike Hearn, he had kind of described that we could do more complex things with Bitcoin script, but he didn't go into much detail. So Craig Wright says that Bitcoin script is Turing complete. The whole world says, well, no, it's not. And a very long story short there, you can do more research on that, is that it is in fact Turing complete. It's very similar to Forth. So someone that would tell you, hey, this language is very similar to Forth would probably identify closely with the creator. Turns out Craig Wright was the one that pretty much made that, put that into the public consciousness. And then, of course, that's been verified by other people. It's been verified by myself by running a Turing complete program in Bitcoin called the Game of Life. It's been verified by other people, which I'll go into a little bit later. Next is the poker game. I actually, most people I think do not know that there was a poker game in the initial Bitcoin software. Craig Wright is the one that always talks about the poker game in the original software. And it just so happens that this person comes from the world of online gaming. So if we want to figure out who Satoshi is, we'd have to find someone that probably does have some kind of background in at least poker, right? So it just so happens Craig Wright does fit that bill. The next is going to be the marketplace. Craig Wright is just the one that explained why there was a marketplace. But again, anyone could come up with an explanation as to why there was a marketplace, and anyone could check the original code for the marketplace. But Craig Wright is the one that always talks about the poker game and the marketplace, as opposed to just about everyone else in the Bitcoin world. And then the double hash. So Craig Wright actually does have an explanation for the double hash. I will put it in the chat or into the description of the link or of the video, which there'll be a lot of other links I'll put down there as well. But the main piece that he goes into when he explains double hash is, actually using a double hash is a security risk. So there would have to be a benefit to doing the double hash if there's a security risk to doing it that way. And he actually gives an entire explanation. I don't really need to go into it. I'll let you do it. But he provides an explanation for the double hash, which we would want the creator to know. And lastly, scaling. So when Craig Wright emerged onto the Bitcoin scene, he was very adamant that Bitcoin was nothing at the time, and it needed to scale universally to the globe. He again is the only person that is identifying as the creator, but then also giving a logical explanation for why he thought that at the time and what the plan was to scale it further. And it just so happens to line up with Satoshi Nakamoto's thoughts on the matter as well. Okay, so of course anyone could probably fake this in some capacity, right? So But in a reasonable person's mind, Craig is starting to earn the identity of the creator by having the expertise in Bitcoin. So the next, so now I'm going to talk about my own personal experience. So if I want to validate the identity of this person, he needs to earn it with me, right? There's a number of things I could go into, but I'm going to talk about just two specific books that I read thanks to Craig Wright. The first, I cannot find it. I had it somewhere. I moved recently, so it might be in a box somewhere. Is a book called Policing Online Games by Peter Weiner. And this book was released in 2006. I'll try and put a graphic of it on the screen when I edit the video. This book was released in 2006 and actually describes the creation of a digital cash for use in gaming using a chain of digital signatures. So he actually completely spells out Bitcoin's, the main function that Bitcoin uses to send coins, all in his description of how to create a digital cash in an online game. So Craig is the one actually that said, look, I didn't come up with all these ideas myself. I put a lot of these ideas together. And he pointed specifically to Peter's book. And it's the first, as far as I know, the first and only description of the digital cash system that Bitcoin uses. Obviously, there are descriptions of a blockchain and a description of creating, a chain of signatures, for example. And that's referenced in the white paper, obviously. But it's actually in Policing Online Games that it talks about that use in digital cash. So you would expect the creator to actually have done some kind of research and incorporated that idea into the creation of Bitcoin if it was out there. And in fact, Craig is the only person that ever has brought this book to anyone's attention. And Peter Weiner himself has mentioned that the book barely sold any copies when he released it. It sold more copies after Craig had mentioned it in a YouTube interview than he had in his whole life. So it's not like this book was in the lexicon or in the public consciousness prior to Craig mentioning this. So I read that book. I would encourage you to read that book. It's very short, very brief, and it describes everything I'm telling you. Now, the other one that's really important is Craig Wright is the only person to describe the network structure as a small world network. So there was one paper that was written theorizing this, but Craig Wright is the only person that said it was designed this way. And, even when he mentioned that, this Bitcoin network topology is a small world network, everyone, still thought he was full of it. But he had me, he didn't tell me to do it, but he told people to read this book. It's called Complex Social Networks. This book was written in, I believe, let me double check. Before the creation of Bitcoin, I believe, or maybe after. Maybe after. I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. This book actually describes from a foundational principles how to create a small world network in internet networks. And it just so happens that this crazy claim that Craig had that everyone thought wasn't true about Bitcoin, the inherent economic properties of Bitcoin create the small world network. That is something that someone that was studied in this would know. They would actually have the ability to understand that someone like with the background that Craig Wright does would be able to understand that the economic incentives directly created in the Bitcoin network emerge as a small world network. And in fact, this is hinted at in the white paper itself under the section network. If you line up the description of the network in the white paper with the principles in this book about small world networks, you'll see pretty clearly that it's actually quite easy to deduce that it emerges as a small world network. Now, I wrote an entire article, I'll link it as well, kind of stepping through that line by line from foundational principles. But again, I'm now learning, I'm learning more and more about this system than I ever could have before. So if we take the analogy of a math professor, a calculus professor, or discoverer, there's only one person that is teaching us new things about Bitcoin and relating it to the creation of Bitcoin. He's giving us an explanation for why Bitcoin script exists. He's giving us an explanation of how we can use Bitcoin script for more complex applications. And then it just so happens that Craig Wright is one of the highest patent filers for blockchain technology. So we would also expect the creator of Bitcoin to be one of the most innovative in the space of blockchain, which again is kind of a BS. The blockchain industry is kind of a scam anyway, but it just so happens that it does actually line up quite well with why the inventor of Bitcoin would be the one that also is the one that's creating the most patents in the blockchain space. Okay, so I'm talking about, so he's earning this identity with me. But then if we want to confirm the identity of someone, we also need attestation. So I mentioned at the very beginning that the government does not grant you identity. Just like the possession of an identification card does not link me to that identity that's on the card. However, I need to provide a certain amount of evidence that I am who I am to be issued a government state ID. So you can see here the government is not granting me the identity of Connor Murray, but it is providing an attestation to the identity of Connor Murray based on some qualification of prerequisites, right? So any identity is going to need attestation. So does Craig Wright have attestation about being the creator of Bitcoin? Well, in fact, he does. He has a number of attestations, more than anyone else can lay claim to. I can run down the list here, but maybe I'll start with the most convincing one, which is Gavin Andresen. So Gavin Andresen was the second in charge of Bitcoin. He was the one that Satoshi Nakamoto handed the Bitcoin Core repository over to. And Gavin Andresen had the most communication with Satoshi Nakamoto. So we would expect Gavin to be the best attestation for the creator that there could possibly be. So obviously Gavin did attest that not only does Craig Wright own or sign with the key that would prove that he is associated with the creator, but he also says that he lines up perfectly with the person that I was communicating back then, and he taught me something new about Bitcoin. And now everyone says, well, Craig or Gavin was bamboozled or blah blah. Well, Gavin actually just under oath in court said that he believes he witnessed a legitimate signing, and that he still believes that Craig Wright is the creator of Bitcoin. So that is one very big attestation if you're trying to look for attestation. The second, let's just go down the list here. Ian Grigg, he's a financial cryptographer, the inventor of triple entry bookkeeping. He did his own research into the topic and then signed his own attestation using ICARS, ICARS. I actually don't fully remember what that means, so let me just look it up real quick. But it's basically a way to say, I'm sorry, ICAR. So ICAR is a standard. I don't know. I'll go to this later. Look into his tweet where he gives the attestation that Craig Wright is the creator of Bitcoin. And then Ian, of course, did his own research into that to come to that conclusion. But he's giving his own attestation to that. John Matonis is another person that apparently has seen a key signing. But again, I'm separating the key from the identity, because remember, in Bitcoin, identity is firewalled from keys and transactions. We can determine, given enough information about the identity associated with a key or associated with a transaction, we can provide a link between those two. But the possession of the key is not what grants identity in Bitcoin. And how could it, right? Because if you own the key to something, it does not mean that, it does not tell us how you came into possession of that key. That's a really important detail to not miss. Now, having possession of the key is further demonstration of identity, but it is not proof of identity. In fact, you can have proof of identity and lose, for example, I can possess a car but lose the key, right? That's a really important distinction. So John Matonis, again, providing the attestation. Joseph von Perling, he was New Liberty on the original forums. So he also communicated with Satoshi, provided his own attestation. He also provided a story of meeting Craig Wright in 2005 at a hacker conference. And Craig Wright told him about Bitcoin. This is in 2005. So again, we have another attestation from an individual that Craig Wright was the guy working on Bitcoin before it was released. We have Clemens Lay. Clemens Lay is the person that independently validated, because he has a PhD in automata theory, that Bitcoin is Turing complete. And he just so happened to find out that Craig Wright was the only other person that had that idea prior to him. He goes to meet Craig, and obviously comes away with the exact same conclusion that Craig is the creator. And he does this in conjunction with Ryan Charles. Ryan has his own video. This is what modeled my video. How I know Craig Wright is Satoshi. You should watch that because he gives his own attestation based on his own prerequisite of knowledge. So both of them meeting Craig and finding out that he's the only person that knows everything about Bitcoin is their own attestation. We have Craig Wright's ex-wife, who's providing an attestation that Craig is the creator of Bitcoin, and that Craig is saying it's ultimately what led to the destruction of his first marriage. We have his current wife, who I've had the pleasure of talking to, who also has her own attestation of Craig Wright's creation of Bitcoin. We have Craig's uncle, who Craig told about the creation of Bitcoin to. Ironically, we also have Dave Kleiman. We have emails between Dave and Craig where Craig is talking about the creation of Bitcoin. So, and I'm recording this on November 14th. So this is before what I suspect more evidence is going to come out that would earn Craig the identity of the creator. But I'm putting this out today for a very specific reason, because identity is earned, and Craig has earned this with a number of people. Calvin Ayre, Stephen Matthews. He has earned attestation from other individuals based on all these reasons that I've identified for earning the creator status. And the very last one is, if Craig Wright did not create Bitcoin, we would expect the creator to have stepped up by now and said, Craig Wright did not create Bitcoin. Because actually Satoshi Nakamoto already did this when it was widely identified that Dorian Nakamoto was the creator of Bitcoin. Satoshi Nakamoto made a public announcement saying that, I am not Dorian Nakamoto. He has not done that for Craig Wright. And the explanation could be given that, well, that means that the actual Satoshi Nakamoto is dead. Or, again, we cannot be simplistic about identity and understand that identity is earned. So given all of the prior information that we have here about the creator, it's more likely that actually the reason why Satoshi Nakamoto has not come out and said, I am not Craig Wright, is because Craig Wright himself was the one that made the message that said, I am not Dorian Nakamoto. So this is all quite simplistic. This is how I know that Craig Wright is the creator of Bitcoin. I'm putting this out on November 14th, prior to the world, quote unquote, knowing it. I believe they will very soon. And I believe it's very important to Craig to establish that identity is not linked to a key. In fact, he established that in 2009 or 2008 when he released the white paper that described this to begin with. It's the privacy model of Bitcoin not to link the key, to not grant identity based on a key. And I believe that is why Craig Wright is, of course, his whole hand has been forced, so it's not really up to him. But he's going to go through this process of proving it in court. So, for example, if more evidence came out, here's what I would find more convincing than a key signing at this point: a credit card statement showing that he purchased the Bitcoin.org domain. That to me would be a nail in the coffin to any other prerequisite, because who else would have bought the Bitcoin.org domain but Satoshi Nakamoto, right? Plus a whole host of other information that I'm sure we'll find out about. And the last attestation I did not mention, of course, is Andrew O'Hagan, the investigative journalist that wrote an entire piece that he essentially concluded, yes, I do believe Craig is the creator. I have no idea why everything happened the way it did in 2016. But we can come up with other explanations for that than we need to. But I've now identified what identity in Bitcoin is and what it is not. And I've identified why I know that Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto without seeing a key signature. Thank you.